Right, so round 2 for the Irish Nationals BattleTech event. If you haven't seen my discussion of round 1 and the discussion of the rules, I'll leave a link somewhere in the video. I'll leave a link for the first part. But a quick summary, I essentially quote-unquote won the match. It doesn't really matter. What matters is your points. But yeah, so we came out quite well with that, destroying half the other opponent's team. Coming into round 2, though, we have some very interesting mech picks from the pool that was available. And in this case, I'd say round 2 was actually my favorite match of the day. I was playing against a new player, very friendly guy that had a lot to it. But I think the thing that turned it over was that it was actually a mirror match, that my picks were the same as my opponents. So what we chose was an Eidolon 4-2 and Jackrabbit 1-2. So it's quite an interesting match, really. So my opponent starts out with, well, I should probably discuss a little bit what the mechs have. In the case of the Eidolon, he's looking at a sub-nose PPC, 2 and 1 arm. And one of the competitors, I didn't actually get a chance to play them, at the event, I asked them what they thought of the Eidolon, and they just said that they didn't choose it specifically because it had its 2 primary weapons in 1 arm. And if that arm is destroyed, the mech is essentially ineffective. It has no weapon attacks it can produce on the board. And according to the rules of the event, if your mech can cause less than 5 damage in terms of weaponry, not in terms of physicals, then it's considered destroyed because it's considered you've made the mech ineffective. So yeah, if you lose your right torso or even just your right arm, effectively that whole mech is destroyed. And I thought that was a valid point. But from my perspective, just defend your right side. And I didn't find that too hard to do. And then the Jackrabbit is much lighter mech. So the Eidolon's coming in with 180 armor, whereas the Jackrabbit's coming in with 60 armor. And it has a medium laser, an AC5 thing, which is essentially the same as a medium laser, and some SRMs. So it's a very light mech. And for a light mech, not particularly fast. It was a 6'9" mover. You're not getting much modifiers out of that. And yeah, it has very good gunnery, like impossibly good gunnery and good piloting skills. But when your light mech is moving slow and it's a 2-on-2 match, there are some concerns there, especially against such a brutal mech as the Eidolon, sitting at 55 tons, ridiculous amount of armor. Yeah, I can nearly move as fast as the Jackrabbit anyway. So, mirror match. My opponent goes first. This map is quite similar to the previous in terms of having a lake in the middle and a couple of hill spots and typical kind of BattleTech match. But my opponent plays a little bit too cautiously, I would say, and just does a walk up with both the Eidolon and the Jackrabbit. So it's just a very low modifier on the 2 units. Following my strategy from the previous round, I decided I would target the weaker mech first, stick together, and in the first round, I almost completely blew the Jackrabbit off the board. The modifier was very low, the armor was very low, the thing was getting completely annihilated. And this was like something I was quite excited about, but also concerned about, because I had a Jackrabbit, and I was thinking like, wow, this thing could just not take any punishment at all. And as the game progressed, the opponent's Jackrabbit had lost core weaponry, had lost a leg, and was destroyed. And then it became a 2-on-1 kind of situation, but not really. So something that my opponent did was quite interesting with the Eidolon is he actually moved into the water, giving himself partial cover and increasing the lethality of that mech, just making it very difficult to deal with. And also with the stub-nose PPC, you want to kind of get in closer, and with the water it was kind of difficult to get in closer. So actually I would normally not consider the water, but in this case it was a very viable tactic for my opponent to use, and just actually gave him much more board control than I expected. And I'll definitely have to reconsider my different opinions on water and how to use it effectively, because my opponent was really showing that with an Eidolon with such good piloting skill, you don't really have much to fear from the water. It's actually a very useful partial cover terrain. But anyway, as opposed to it becoming a 2-on-1, by this point, the game is only going to be an hour and a half long. Essentially, what ended up happening is we both realized that we were not going to be able to destroy each other's Eidolons, and my opponent was trying to take out my right arm. I was trying to cause just total damage to his mech, and in addition to that, my own Jackrabbit at this point, despite what I would consider a fairly good play for what was a slow mech. At this point, he had lost both his right and left arms. Thankfully, he hadn't lost his legs. And instead of the game becoming a 2-on-1, it became more a game of cat and mouse. So it was where my Eidolon was maybe harassing his, but it didn't really matter. There was no way we were going to do any significant amount of damage to it before the end of the game. What it really was my Jackrabbit trying to hide from his Eidolon, because it would be an unequal. Even though I got an early lead on the match, it doesn't make my Jackrabbit any stronger. And 25 tons, already missing 2 arms. I just kind of moved the thing around, try to keep it behind a hill, kind of out of line of sight in one of the final turns. And like I said, it wasn't easy to keep the Jackrabbit away from the Eidolon, because the Eidolon nearly moves as fast as the Jackrabbit, and the Jackrabbit, as a light mech, doesn't have any jump jets, whereas the Eidolon does. It doesn't need jump jets. So it was very easy for him to just jump over terrain and corner me, and yeah, it was a small miracle that my Jackrabbit wasn't destroyed. I was actually really surprised. Like, on paper, the Jackrabbit doesn't look that bad, but actually, and when you look at the gunnery skill and the pilot, you think, this is pretty decent mech. But when you see the walking speed and the running speed, and you look at the armor, and you see it in play, you begin to realize very quickly that this mech is not fast enough for the job it needs to do. I mean, it should at least have jump jets, in my opinion. But as a mirror match, the game came less down to random luck or a particular mech dominating the field and just down to general play. And I think both myself and my opponent played well, and we played to our strengths. And yeah, I don't think I could have really asked for a better round. I don't think the Jackrabbit ever really had a realistic chance of threatening the Eidolon, and I was just lucky to not lose my Jackrabbit. And that was essentially how round 2 went in that regard. Unfortunately, the Jackrabbit is also worth quite a bit less battle value, so I only got 37% of the possible 100 points that were going for this round. So I do imagine this was a round that could threaten my overall ranking, because other competitors at this point may have destroyed not just 1 mech but 2 mechs per round. So yeah, this was going to be an issue coming up against this matchup. Maybe I would have been better off going for the Eidolon and ignoring the Jackrabbit completely. It wasn't a huge threat. Maybe try and go for that 63%. That's something to think about. But yeah, I wasn't too unhappy with this. It was actually a very tight game. I believe like my own Jackrabbit was like 1 point off on a critical to losing his last weapon, which would have accounted him as a total destruction, because he would have effectively had no weapons. And then the opponent would have also gotten 37 points. So even though I dominated the game from a point perspective, it was very close. And these are the kind of differences you have to look out for when you're playing a friendly game and when you're playing a competitive game. You have to keep the scoring system in mind. Otherwise, you can run into situations where it looks like you're winning, but then when you actually count it up, and you could have played very well, but when you actually count the points of how the game is scored, you actually kind of come out worse than your opponent. And I was very close to the game becoming a draw. But anyway, let's move on to round 3. I'll leave a link right here.